Keith, you come to us from Evansville, Indiana, where you pastor Bethel Church.
Yeah.
So you pastor in real time. You preached just last Sunday.
Yes.
And you'll preach again next Sunday.
Yep.
And that's very, very important because there are real stories of you're engaging people every single day.
Yeah.
You also have a not-for-profit organization called Emerge,
Yes.
where you are in high schools all across North America. You speak on average to about 100,000 high school kids a year. And you've written books, and you're active in social media, mid-30s now.
Yeah.
And life is just beginning in
Yeah.
many ways for ministry. And I'm so happy that you are part of our Huntley Street family this week, and we look
Thank
forward
you.
to having you back again and again. It all looks good now,
Sure.
but there's a story that when you were in middle school, junior high school, things began to unravel for
Yeah.
you, and you went down a dark path.
I did.
Discovered light later.
Yeah.
But I'm going to just be quiet now and let you tell this story, and because I think our audience needs to hear this amazing story of amazing grace.
Yeah, and it truly is, and it even starts a little bit earlier than that. A lot of people talk about at-risk youth, but usually there are things that lead to that earlier in life, some things that kind of set up, maybe predispose young people toward a series of negative choices that they begin to make in their adolescence. And when I was a kid growing up, I just remember feeling incredibly insecure in this world, feeling like an oops, feeling like an accident, like my life really had no purpose. And that started when I was really, really young. And at an early age, I began to endure abuse in my home, physically, emotionally, and it began to just take a toll on me as it would any child. And kind of growing up in this environment where I felt so claustrophobic and felt like I couldn't talk to anyone about what was happening. Because when you're raised in an environment like that, you begin to look out your window and you think that there's only ugliness in the world. And I remember just being so ashamed where I was from when I was a kid because I grew up in this impoverished environment, feeling as though I had no hope and no chance to succeed in the world.
No origin, no destiny.
Right.
Hopeless.
Yeah, and I always say that I believe that there are three basic questions that really are embedded into the DNA of every single human on the planet. I've now had the privilege of traveling and speaking in various countries and cultures, and no matter where I go, I find these three questions to be embedded inside of every one of us. And the first question is a question of origins. Why am I here? And of course, we know that the Bible has answers for that we're not just a random act of chance, but that our lives are actually connected to a divine destiny and a purpose and a creator. But I was raised in an environment where I felt like an oops and an accident because my mom met my dad when she was a teenager and got pregnant, and they just kind of started this life almost accidentally. And then bringing children up into a world where neither one of them really having a solid education background, they struggled for employment, and there were just a lot of challenges. One of the other things that happened early on that made me question, not just where am I, why am I here and where do I come from, but where am I going in life? And I think those are the three questions, where do I come from, why am I here, and where am I going? And I had no good answers from that. And to make matters worse, from the time that I was young, my father was sick a lot. He was in and out of the hospital. When he was in his early 30s, he developed a debilitating disease that kept him in and out of the hospitals. He was on dialysis by the time he was 37, 38 years old, had a stroke when I was in junior high. And so I grew up feeling very invisible and feeling forgotten because all of this stress and this trauma was happening in our home.
The attention was going toward him.
Yeah, and so my father began to be very angry. And I don't mean any disrespect when I say those things, but it began to have an impact on how I saw the world. And when you grow up surrounded by ugliness, it's hard to believe that there's anything beautiful that exists in the world.
Right.
And so at a young age, I began to experiment with drugs and with alcohol, some of it just to numb the pain of what I was going through.
What age did you start?
About 12 years of age. I started taking shots of liquor, and I started experimenting with illegal drugs. And by the time I was in junior high, I was that kid that most parents don't want their kids to hang out with. I became the guy that most dads don't want their daughter to date. And my life continued to spiral out of control until really the worst day of my life happened when I was 15 years of age. And I came home from school to find out that my father had tragically and abruptly died. And he had been in the hospital for several months in the time leading up to his untimely death. And I remember hearing that news that day that my father had died. He was, at the time, he was just 42 years of age. And I remember feeling so alone in that moment and feeling like I had no hope for my life. And after that, I just went on this mode of self-destruct. My life began to spiral out of control, and the drug abuse continued to increase. I began to run away from home, and I felt completely lost in the world. And I really had a death wish. I didn't want to live anymore. And so I began to get arrested, get in trouble with the law, and was put on probation, labeled an at-risk youth.
Right.
Began failing in classes and those kinds of things. And over the next couple of years, I just was on a bent of destruction.
Was there a catalytic moment where it seemed you hit the bottom, or
Yeah.
was there a relationship that came your way where somebody got your attention?
Yeah.
What happened next?
I was 17 years of age, 2 years after my father had died. No hope, no direction in my life. I was sitting in my bedroom on house arrest, waiting for trial to probably do some time in prison for the crimes that I'd committed. And while I was sitting there on house arrest, I just thought to myself, you know, now's a good time just to end your life, Keith. There's no hope, there's no purpose for you. You have no reason for existence. And I was tired of sucking air, and I just wanted to die. And I pulled a gun out from under my bed and put that gun to my temple. And I remember thinking to myself, if my younger brother walks in and sees me like this, sees my body like this, he'll never recover from it. And so out of this compassion that I had for him to have some kind of better life than the one that I had had, I put the gun away and thought, I've got to find another way to end my life. Well, what I didn't know is that very day, a woman had called our house, a woman that attended church about 15 minutes from my home. And she had heard that I was on house arrest and I was going through some problems. She was a youth group mom at a church, and she was a volunteer leader, and she heard a prayer request from one of my classmates and said, pray for Keith Robinson.
Right.
So she called my mom and said, I want to stop by the house and bring Keith a Bible. And she knew my mom from years before, and so she decided in that moment that she was going to come and pay me a visit. And do you know, John, that visit totally changed my life. She came into my bedroom, laid a Bible at the foot of my bed, and said a prayer for me that day and said, Keith, I want to invite you to church. When she prayed for me that day, I knew right then that God was more than a fairy tale figure off in the distance somewhere, but that he was real and he was personal. And from that day forward, I began to pray, Jesus, if you're real, will you change my life? And you know, John, God was up to that challenge. 2 weeks later, went to church, and I heard the gospel of Jesus Christ for the first time. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And in that moment, I found the Father's love in the person of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice. I went forward in that church, got on my knees, and I prayed. No one led me in a prayer. I just prayed, God, change my life. And God absolutely did that in that moment. Yeah. And the rest is history. Totally turned my life around.
You know, today, if you're watching and you hear Keith's story, this isn't fiction. This is what happened to him. We have a prayer line available 24 hours a day. We receive over 1,000 calls per day to our prayer center, people that have various needs and various struggles. Today, wherever you are on the journey, you may be young, middle-aged, you may be senior in your years, and you are still trying to cope with issues related to origin and destiny and everything in between. We believe that Jesus Christ is the hope of the world, and we would love to have an opportunity, if you'd call us, for us to be able to listen, to care for you, to take an open Bible and share with you from the Scriptures the love of God, and pray with you, if you do not know Christ, to receive him as your Lord and Savior. That prayer line is on the screen, and I hope that you will call it. It's a big part of why we are here every single day. Keith, thank you for the story, and we want to continue to hear more as to what happened between age 17 and age 35, because we see what God has done in your life, and we're so encouraged. And hasn't meant that life has been easy. There always has its struggles and difficulties. But because of Christ, there's a way to navigate through with encouragement and hope. Thanks again.
Thank you.